Greetings and welcome to The Movement with Kemet Shockley and Kofi Niles. Thank you for joining us. This show highlights the most important voices in the current Black movement for social justice. This is a chance for us to learn from the most insightful and impactful leaders in the community. Today we are here with Mr. Anthony T Browder, who is an author, book publisher, cultural historian, an artist, and an educational consultant. Mr. Browder has lectured extensively around the world. He's a graduate of Howard University. He has been described as a critically important leader of the community, and he is celebrated for his groundbreaking work surrounding ancient Kemet, or ancient Egypt. Mr. Browder, welcome to the movement, and thank you for having us in your home today.
It's a pleasure to be with you today.
All right. Mr. Browder, the first question for you is not so much about your work as it is your legacy. You are one of the most well-known African-American cultural historians of our time. And within Black communities worldwide, you are one of the most respected authors and thinkers. Could you tell us a little bit about what that's like for you? So first of all, what is that like for you? And what is it like to know that sometime down the line, way down the line, you're going to leave a powerful legacy and be recorded in history? And also, what's it like to do such challenging work?
Well, I can say that the work that I'm doing is a continuation of the work of those scholars that preceded me. I was quite fortunate in the 80s to meet and have relationships with some of the most significant scholars of that time, Dr. Yosef Ben Yochanan, A.C.G. Hilliard, Naeem Akbar, Wade Nobles, Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Patricia Newton, John G. Jackson, John Henry Clark. These were my heroes and sheroes, and I was blessed to have a personal relationship with them as well as a business relationship with them. And I modeled much of what I do now is based on the life lessons that I learned when I was in their space. And so to be able to continue their work is part of what this work is all about. I remember John Henry Clark saying years ago that this work is not work, it's a priesthood. And one must be dedicated to the mission, which is to restore the memory of African people. So now that many of those elders are now ancestors, and I've ascended into the role of an elder, then I see myself as playing the same role for young folk as Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and others played for me. It's my responsibility to keep the door open. It's my responsibility to inspire them and let them know that this is not a rat race, this is a relay race. The baton has been passed to me. I'm going to run as far as I can with it, then I will pass it on to those who are coming behind me. At this point in my life, I am focusing my attention on legacy building. I'm working specifically with young folk, primarily young folk who are in their 30s and 40s, who have been around me for a while, who I am handing off pieces of my business to. So I've got a team of people who've been with me during the Egypt on the Potomac field trips for 15 years. So I'm handing that business off to them. My daughter has been with me doing this work since she was 4 or 5 years old. She just turned 38. And so I'm priming my daughter to continue the work that I'm doing in Egypt. We just published our 3rd book together. And I like to think that what I'm doing is pouring myself into these souls so that they would do the same for the young people who will approach them when they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's how we make progress and ultimately achieve mental victory.
Powerful answer. Let me ask you this, and I know that you are a humble man, and I can tell by the way you answered that question, but I am curious, what is it like to be in that position? What is that like for you?
This is all I know, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I have come to embrace the fact that this is my life's mission. You know, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said that everyone has a cosmic assignment, and I know that this is my assignment, to do the work, to do the research, and to share this information with those with the greatest need to know. And this is all I know. So if I were doing less than that, I would be dissatisfied. But considering the fact that I am on point, I am on mission, I'm comfortable with that.
This show is about the movement that we see in Black America today, the response that Black people are having in society to things that are happening to them. what I wanted to ask you about is, in that, the piece about identity. As one of the major leaders who provides alternative images for Black people in terms of who they are, who are we? That's the first thing. Who are we? And what does Egypt or Kemet have to do with who we are? I'll start with those two.
Well, we are the byproduct of 400 years of an intentional effort to destroy us, to erase our memory, to separate us from the land of our ancestors, and to make us believe that we are less than we truly are. It's a miracle that we're still alive. It's a greater miracle that some of us have our minds intact and are striving to awaken brothers and sisters who are searching for the light. So that's a reality. So this movement that you're referring to is not so much a movement as it is a cyclical process. Nothing that comes stays and nothing that goes is lost. So we're in a position now where we're in the process of remembering, awakening, and then allowing ourselves to be the vessels through which our ancestors would do their best work. So these are concepts and ideas that are outside of the norm of traditional society, but these are the concepts and ideas that have maintained us, whether we were conscious of it or not, for the last 400, 500 years. Within us is a power that is stronger than our oppressor's ability to destroy us. And once we understand the source of that power and tap into that power, then we become everything that our oppressors were afraid of. And that is the mission.
What would you say to someone who's wondering why so much focus on the African part of what we've done? Because I hear that all the time.
Sure. And that's somewhat understandable, because not only have people of African ancestry been miseducated, but everybody on the planet has been miseducated. So a person who has that consciousness, I would direct them to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. There was an exhibit there in the David Koch Hall of Human Origins. It was a $15 million exhibit that was established about 7 or 8 years ago. And in that exhibit, it says that 100,000 years ago, Africans were the only people on the planet. It's at the Smithsonian now. David Koch Hall of Human Origins. Yes, that David Koch of the Koch brothers, right? So even the broken clock is right twice a day, right? So David Koch says in that exhibit that 100,000 years ago, Africans were the only people on the planet. They go on to say that 60,000 years ago, a group of these Africans living in East Africa walked out of Africa into Eastern Asia and populated Eastern Asia. And then they go on to state that approximately 40,000 years ago, another group of these same Africans walked into Western Asia, the landmass that we now call Europe, and populated Europe. So if you process just those three pieces of information, it reinforces the fact that humanity was born in Africa. The first Homo sapiens sapiens lived in Africa, and Africa alone, before they appeared anywhere else on the planet. It speaks to the reality that there is no such thing as race. Race is a false construct that was created by racists in order to confuse mankind. There's only one race, the human race, which has its origins in Africa. So everyone, on a genetic level, everyone is of African ancestry, whether they know it or not, or whether they look like it or not. The further you move away from the equator, the further you move away from the sun, the lighter your skin becomes because of melanin. And other factors contribute to the change of facial features. So that's one very important reality. You'll also find in the same museum, on the opposite end of the David Koch Hall of Human Origins, you'll find an exhibit on ancient Africa. And in this exhibit on ancient Africa, as soon as you walk into the exhibit, it talks about the Nile Valley. It talks about ancient Kush. And what they state is that ancient Kush, the civilization of ancient Kush, rose around the same time as the civilization of ancient Kemet, but it lasted longer. It lasted about 3,000 years longer. So when we talk about Africa, we're talking about the birthplace of humanity. When we talk about Africa, specifically the Nile Valley, and the Nile Valley civilization includes civilization in Uganda, Ethiopia, Kush, Sudan, and Kemet or Egypt. So it's a 4,200-mile cultural highway. And the culture migrated with the people from the south to the north. And so the civilization that we refer to as Kemet or Egypt is considered by Chancellor Williams as Ethiopia's oldest daughter, right? But we find in Kemet the greatest evidence of what human beings have achieved when they're left to their own devices, the beginning of architecture, the beginning of government, the beginning of agriculture, the beginning of engineering, science, philosophy, astronomy, the beginning of all of those things that indicates a civilized nation and a civilized people. So Africa is important because it's the birthplace of humanity, culture, and civilization that expanded from the Nile Valley south and west, influencing dozens of countries on the continent. And that is the reason why Europeans were obsessed with coming to Africa, because Africa was the source of knowledge, culture, and civilization. And a thief only goes where there is something to steal.
If I'm watching this, and my question to you is, are you saying that me as a black person, as an African American, are you saying that my ancestors are ancient Egyptians? Is that what you're saying here?
Well, part of what I'm saying is everyone's ancestors come from Africa. And what we've been able to ascertain over the past 4 years now, based on the research that we're doing in Egypt, excavations that we've been doing for the past 12 years in Egypt, we have come across evidence that shows a migration of Africans from the Nile to the Niger. We know that there were at least 6 migrations that led to the development of culture and civilization within Ghana, Senegal, Gambia, Ivory Coast, Nigeria. And the last group of Africans to migrate from the Nile to the Niger were those Africans who developed culture and civilization in Mali. They are known as the Dogon. It was those Africans in West Africa who were ultimately kidnapped and then brought to the Americas. So that Africans in the America, in the diaspora, are the descendants of West Africans who were kidnapped, who were the descendants of Africans from East Africa who migrated to West Africa over a period of say 1,000 years or so. And in those cultures, in Ghanaian culture, in Senegalese culture, in Dogon culture, they speak about their ancestors having migrated there from the Nile. So our job is to open the door so that more research can be done on this important aspect of human migration and human history, so that the generations who come behind us will never ask that question.
You know, so in this time, over the past several decades, since you and others have been sort of uncovering what's happening in our history in the Nile Valley, and you've written your famous book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, since that's happened over time, there's been some backlash, and there have been some people who have written some things to sort of challenge these ideas. I wanted to ask if you would take a quick look at this.
Athens, 2,400 years ago. It's a compact place. Only about 250,000 people live here. There are fine baths, theatres, temples, shopping arcades and gymnasiums. It's warm for more than half the year. This is also home to the world's first true and probably greatest philosopher, Plato.
So the world's first philosopher, Plato, your reaction?
Well, it depends on which world you're talking about. In the European world, the Greek world, they can think that if they want to, but in the world of reality, the Greeks learned philosophy from Kemet. The oldest philosophical texts were written in Kemet before Greece became a nation state. And anyone who has studied the history of the Greeks would know that. You go where the knowledge is if you're thirsty for knowledge. So the Greeks were enamored with the history and culture and traditions of the Nile Valley. So philosophy was about cultivating a deeper understanding of your soul and your soul's relationship to the life that you're living. So everything within the history of Kemet reinforced philosophical concepts and ideas that were never acknowledged as being African in origin, but have served as the foundation for philosophical traditions as well as religious traditions. And again, anyone who does a deep dive into the study of Kemet as opposed to the study of Egypt will begin to find that that is the source for the knowledge and wisdom that has been attributed to the Greeks and Romans and others.
And you mentioned earlier that we are in a process of remembering. You're a memory recovery expert. Can you help us understand what that means and how your expertise can help Black people?
Well, when we think about the fact that, our past has been erased, and then the erasure has been forgotten. If we go back to the comments that were made by Henry Berry Esquire on the floor of the Virginia House of Delegates around 1834, this politician said to other white Virginia politicians who also happened to be enslavers, he said, "Sir, we have so far as possible closed every avenue through which light may enter the slave's mind. If we could extinguish their capacity to see the light, then they would be on the level of the beasts of the field. Our work would be complete and we would be safe." Now, what he was talking about is this intentional process of miseducation, erasing the historical and cultural memory of African people, and then seeing to it that that job was complete so that they would be safe. This was their life's work, to erase our memory, to erase our cultural hard drive, and then to tell us that we were nothing. To even convince some of us that the Lord and Savior of the world, Jesus Christ, condemned us to death because we didn't have a soul. So they could steal us, they could rape us, they could sell us, they could lynch us, and not violate any of the so-called 10 Commandments because we were not human. So, which means to me that they were in fact the ones whose memories have been erased because they didn't know that they were Africans. They didn't know that they were abusing the mothers and fathers of culture and civilization. So we've been dealing with a period for hundreds of years of the erasure of the erasure of the erasure. And the only thing that would bring back a sense of my balance, harmony, and reciprocity is to begin to speak a truth that has been hidden, a truth that will transform the world, a truth that will ignite something within the consciousness of everyone who, upon hearing it, will know that they were more than what they've been taught. They're more than what they've been told. And that by taking time to center yourself, to study your history and your culture, to cultivate relationships with others who are doing the same, that then makes it possible for the best in you to begin to manifest itself and your memory to be restored.
And it makes me think about young people who are growing up in society and being socialized to not understand who they are. And one of the things that they learn early are stories about other cultural groups. What's one story that all people should know?
Well, the most important story is humanity began in Africa, right? All people are of African ancestry. So it benefits everyone to want to get as close to the source of that knowledge as possible because it benefits everyone. Race is a false construct that was created by racists in order to sow seeds of confusion and division. That benefits a small handful of people while the majority suffers. So I believe that we're going through a profound period of change right now. The earth is changing. Politics is changing. The economic, social, and educational order of American society is changing, and it will never be as it was before. Now, change is inevitable, and the question then is, where are you going to be in this process of change? Are you going to be behind the change and never catch up? Are you going to be caught in the middle of the change and try to find which way to go? Or will you be ahead of the curve because you understood what Dr. Clark meant when he said that history is the clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day? History is the compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History follows cycles. And once you understand the cyclical nature of history, then it's simply a matter of understanding where you are in the cycle, how you got here, and to be able to forecast what that cycle is going to look like over the course of the next year, 5 years, 10 years, or century, and position yourself accordingly. So that's the process that when people begin to understand how truly easy life is, right? Life gives you what you request of it, right? Life gives you what you give it. And once you understand that everything that structures our world is based upon this ancient Kemetic philosophical principle known as ma'at, reciprocity, that is the order of the millennium for every single millennium that human beings have lived on this planet. And once you know these simple, basic, and fundamental truths, then everything else becomes a walk in the park.
What are the first steps if somebody watching this wants to learn about Ma'at, wants to better understand what you've shared? What are some of the things they can do?
We're in this predicament not because of some fault of our own, but because of the intentional efforts of our oppressors to deny us basic human rights. If you read Carter G. Woodson's masterpiece, The Miseducation of the Negro, we're in the position that we're in because of events that were set in motion over 100 years ago and have been repeatedly playing themselves out generation after generation after generation. It was illegal for enslaved Africans in America to read or write. Why? Because the enslavers knew that if you could write about where you came from, what your profession was, what your cultural traditions were, then you could pass that information on to your descendants, and they would have a means of freeing their minds while their bodies were still enslaved. But if you ban reading, if you ban writing, if you convince people that we are inferior, then that puts a psychological hold in the minds of most people. It puts chains on your mind. So we're talking about undoing years of psychological slavery. And as A.C. Hilliard said, psychological slavery or mental slavery is worse than physical slavery, because such a person who is mentally enslaved can't see the shackles that are on their mind. So one of the best things that a person of African descent can do is to read. Fall in love with books. Begin to read for all of your ancestors who are not given the privilege to read. So read the books by our scholars. Read my books. Read what I refer to as forbidden knowledge. There is a reason why my books were banned from Howard University. There's a reason why some people in the District of Columbia wanted to ban my books, Dr. Clark's books, A.C. Hilliard's books, Francis Cress Welsing's books, because books are the passports to freedom, to the freedom of the mind. So anyone who is truly interested in wanting to become more engaged, more in sync with the times, has to begin by spending more time reading and less time on social media. They have to begin to cultivate a relationship with their inner selves and their ancestors. Or as a brother said at a lecture one time, they have to get off of Facebook and get their face in a book.
What is the problem with social media? What is the reason why you said that about not looking at social media as much? And what kinds of issues do you see us having as a result of the social media phenomenon?
I could reference my dear friend, who's now an ancestor, Dr. Patricia Newton, a psychiatrist who practiced in Baltimore. She talked about the fact that children, particularly children, young people who spend time on social media, it rewires their brain. And that social media, and this data has been acknowledged by other social scientists, children specifically who are in the process of wiring their neurons, right? Developing the infrastructure by which they will live the rest of their lives. When you spend time on social media, that limits the capacity for your mind to grow and expand as it had done for thousands of years. And that there have been studies done to show that people's tendency, particularly young people's tendency, to pick up the phone every time it dings, to check the email, check messages, it creates a sensation in the body that is similar to the sensation that a crack addict has. And there are psychologists who are now saying that these devices are addictive. And studies have come out to show that the creation of these devices, the look of the screens, the music, and all of these things were developed by experts at Google and Facebook in order to make you addictive to this device. And the devices are used to sell you everything. So we are programmed to be consumers like no other generations in human history. And as a result, and we are social creatures by nature, right? But this device, holding this device in our hands, has separated us from positive interactions with other human beings. So if you talk to young people today, or if you just watch young people, they're walking down the street looking at their cellular devices. They don't engage in meaningful conversations with them, or when they talk to an adult, they can't look you in the eye for more than 2 or 3 seconds. So what will be the long-term implications of generations growing up addicted to these digital devices and being strangers to human interactions? How would that affect our mental development, our emotional development 4 or 5 generations from now? So these are issues that psychologists are beginning to look at seriously now. And I would trust that parents, adults who have children, will begin to monitor and restrict their children's use of these cellular devices.
So the omission of truth about Black history from social studies and other texts in schools is a big problem, and is one of the reasons why African Americans and others have lost a lot of faith in the education system. I have a 2-part question about that. One, is there a significant enough movement to correct the problem of a lack of truthful Black history in texts? So is there enough of a movement? And what current projects do you have going that are going to be important for youth and communities?
Well, personally, I feel that there is not enough momentum to infuse African content into curriculum K through 12 at a minimum. And one of the reasons why this momentum is not as strong as it needs to be is because adults in the communities aren't aware of what the children are being taught. These adults don't even know history. These adults, who are the tax-paying citizens, whose taxes are paying for the miseducation of every child in every classroom, have a responsibility to know what is and what is not being taught, and to insist that their tax dollars be used to educate the minds of every child in every classroom throughout America. But we also know that education, or miseducation, is a billion-dollar industry. The writing and publishing of textbooks is a billion-dollar industry. And a handful of states, primarily Texas and California, determines the flavor of textbooks that are used in most school systems throughout the country. So until we can begin to look at the economics of miseducation and begin to hold school systems and school officials accountable, we're going to continue to get the same old miseducation on steroids. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Makes perfect sense. And what kinds of things do you have going on?
Well, we've got a couple of projects going on. We are in our 12th year of the excavation and restoration of 3 Kushite tombs, 3 2,700-year-old tombs that we're excavating and restoring in Egypt right now at this time. And as a result of the 12 years that I've spent in this project, the 14 years that this project has been going on, we have enough data to literally rewrite the history of the Kushite presence in Kemet and the history of Kemet. And so that information is going to be coming out, and it will be made available into school systems all around the country and around the world. We have a project, a cultural imperative program, which is in place in about a dozen cities throughout the United States. We're working specifically with high school students, where they're reading essays, selected essays from my first book, From the Browder File, which will introduce them to specific aspects of African and African American history and culture. So part of our job at this moment is to prepare our replacements, to prepare the next generations, and to expose them to what I refer to as forbidden knowledge, information which has intentionally been withheld from students in classrooms throughout the United States and around the world. We have another very special project that should be available to the public in late 2021, and that is the John Henry Clark Enhanced History Project. That program is going to be installed on the second floor of the Thurgood Marshall Center in Washington, D.C., where our offices are located. That program is an outgrowth of my dissatisfaction with an aspect of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. 60% of that incredible museum is underground, is in the David M. Rubenstein History Halls. 60% of the artifacts in that museum, 60% of the history of African people in America is underground, and it begins with a reenactment of the process of enslavement. And so when I first went to the museum and stepped into this space, I noticed that from an architectural standpoint, the space was dark, the exhibits were crammed together, the passageways were small in order to force the people to come together, to crawl together, so that psychologically they would feel as though they were in a slave ship. And then as they read the text in the exhibitions, and they saw the horrors of the Ma'afa, the horrors of the slave trade, I saw grown men and women crying. I saw two elderly black men walking through the exhibit, and I heard one say to the other, you know, I got to get out of here before I hurt some white person. And what that meant to me was that these elders had never been exposed to the history of enslavement. This knowledge is still not being taught today. So that people who have no knowledge of the process of enslavement will have a visceral reaction to this horrific experience. And so we have to move beyond the emotional response to this and understand that this process set in motion the birth of the United States of America. This is the process which has made the United States of America the wealthiest nation in human history. The wealth of America is built on the destruction of the indigenous people of this country and the enslavement of tens of millions of African people who were responsible for building this country and giving it a leg up on the rest of the world. So, you know, America doesn't want to acknowledge its greatest sin, and until she does that, she will suffer the consequences, because karma is a mug, right? And you have to account for all the good and all the bad that you do in your life and in your existence. And so when I began to look at, when I became aware of how few of our people were aware of the horrors of enslavement, and that there was no information in this incredible museum, there was no information that talked about who we were before our world was turned upside down. So my response to that was to not complain, but to gather the resources so that I can create an exhibition that would explain who we were before the Ma'afa. So this is the John Henry Clark Enhanced History Project. So we're enhancing the history that we're currently being taught, using the model of John Henry Clark, Asa Hilliard, Francis Welsing, and so many of our scholars whose books were banned, right, in most school systems. This material consists of what I refer to as forbidden knowledge. Here in 2020, there is certain information that is not allowed to be taught in certain school systems right now because of people's fear of how people of African ancestry specifically will respond to learning the horrors of what was done to us. My suggestion is, let's go back thousands of years before the Ma'afa, thousands of years before our world was turned upside down, when we were in control of our destinies, when Africa was the showcase to the world. People from all around the planet strove in every way possible to come to the Nile River Valley to study the greatest examples of human achievement in the history of the world.
That's fascinating. So, you know, sometimes when I am reading your books and listening to you now and talking about the importance of our history and culture, I know the connection. I think I know the connection between that and what's happening in the streets to Black people now. Could you just help people understand why this is important information in the face of the things that are happening to Black people now? How does it help us to address police brutality? How does that knowledge help us to address miseducation? How does it help us to address our issues with one another? How does that knowledge help us to improve those situations?
So I want to quote one infamous person and one famous person. The infamous person is James Madison, fourth president of the United States, writer of the U.S. Constitution. The third building of the Library of Congress is named in honor of James Madison. And as you enter that building, to the left of the entrance is a quote by James Madison. Madison says that knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and the people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. So knowledge is power, and whoever has knowledge, and more specifically, accurate knowledge of the world and the society in which they live, will be able to move through that society with ease and achieve the highest levels of success within that society. Now, the famous person I want to quote is one of my favorite scholars, John Henry Clark, who said that all history is a current event. We see the same things repeating themselves over and over and over again. Why are they repeating themselves? Because people have not learned the lesson. And you keep repeating the lesson until you learn the lesson, and then you'll have a new lesson. So all the lessons don't necessarily have to be bad. Issues with police brutality exist because the police force was created initially to catch runaway Africans when they were enslaved. That is the origin of the police force. They were part of the slave patrols. And so police were designed to serve and protect. To serve and protect whom? The people with money. To protect their businesses and their property. And because of the fact, Shashi McIntyre wrote a book called The Criminalization of a Race. And so Michelle Alexander talked about the new Jim Crow. So the data is there to support the fact that the legal system has created environments which result in certain people in certain environments being forced because of circumstances beyond their control to engage in criminal behavior. They become what Michelle Alexander refers to as the low-hanging fruit. They are the ones the police force will constantly arrest. So one of the things that it begs that people of African ancestry must begin to do is to police ourselves. And you police yourselves by beginning first by policing everybody in your household. You teach your children how to be respectful. You know, there's been a lot of conversation about black parents having the conversation with their children. Well, those conversations have been going on for generations, and they need to be intensified now. One of the reasons why they need to be intensified has to do with the advent of social media and the music which 2 generations of black folk have grown up listening to. I refer to it as crap music. I refer to it as pornography. Anytime you have young souls internalizing profanity, internalizing violence and gratuitous sex, that rewires their mind into normalizing abnormal behavior. So who benefits from that? The police officers who arrest these children, the court systems who will try them, and the prison systems, which are now privatized. So what we're dealing with is a new form of slavery with the same old slave catchers holding black people under their thumb with their knees on our necks. So this is the reality that we have been living with ever since we have been living in America. Cultivating historical consciousness helps you put things into context. And once you understand the cyclical nature of the violence that we have been subjected to, then that gives any intelligent person the opportunity to begin to find a way to circumvent the violence. And so what I trust will be the outcome of this extended period of police violence against black bodies, what I trust will be an outcome is for us to begin to look at what we can do to change our minds, to change our speech, to change our behavior, to change our action so that we can change everything else and everybody else that we come in contact with. That's the power that we have. And when we know that we have that power, when we understand how to use it, and when we use it effectively, it changes everything around us.
I've heard some younger people say in reference to music is that every generation has a problem with the music that's behind them.
Of course it does. And that's a legitimate statement. That's a legitimate statement because every generation brings something new to something old, or sees something through a different lens. But in the history of humanity, there has never been a generation that has been as violent and as disrespectful as this current generation has been. This is aberrant behavior. This is a process of resocialization that has been brought about by internalizing pornography, internalizing violence, which has literally rewired their neural pathways such that they begin to believe that that is acceptable. To young folk who say that, I say, okay, let's wait 30 years from now until you have children and grandchildren, and let's see what your position is on this subject then. Right? So, again, I think the issue is understanding what music is. Music is a conduit of culture. Who profits from this pornographic music that too many of our children listen to? Who profits? Not the artists, but the people who privatize the prisons, the people who profit from poverty, who profit from violence. They're the ones who make sure that this information is accessible to those who need it the least because of the outcomes that they know that will come from internalizing this toxin. You don't find other people in other parts of the world internalizing this music and this behavior and subjecting their own people to this pornography. No conscious people would do it to themselves, only the unconscious. And so what we have to do with the unconscious, we've got to make them conscious. And we have to understand that not every person is capable of cultivating a consciousness. Some folk are too far gone. I'm just going to be real. Some folk are too far gone. But everything that we do determines the trajectory of our lives, whether we know it or not. Everything that we internalize. Now follow this process. There's a saying that you are what you eat, right? You eat healthy food, you'll have a healthy disposition. You eat junk food, you'll have a junk disposition. You eat a lot of sugar, you develop hypertension. You eat other foods that are known to be carcinogenic, then you may have various forms of cancer. You are what you eat, but you are also what you listen to. You're also what you see. Everything that comes into your body affects you on a cellular level and either moves you closer to health, happiness, and prosperity, or illness, death, and poverty. So these are realities that we seriously have to begin to start looking at, because the science of epigenetics is now coming into our consciousness now. Epigenetics. And that it used to be believed that the genetic change in a population occurs over a protracted period of time. But through the science of epigenetics, we now understand very clearly that the genetic composition of a people can be changed in one generation. And again, to quote my dear friend, Dr. Patricia Newton, the Africans who got on the slave ships in Africa were genetically different than the Africans who were offloaded in America, North America, South America, Central America, and every island in the Caribbean. So that experience, that horrific experience, has changed us on a genetic level. And we need to understand that so that we can be active participants in rewiring our neural pathways so that we can become the brilliant human beings that we were born to be.
And earlier you mentioned if people don't get it right, they'll have to get it right in another lifetime or a lifetime after that. I want to talk to you about religion. You once said, if you look at the origins of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you will see without a shadow of a doubt that they are rooted in ancient African spiritual traditions. My question is, why do you think so many Black people practice the aforementioned religious traditions instead of an African spiritual tradition?
All right, let's look at it this way. All free people choose their relationship with divinity. Only slaves and conquered people take on the religions of their conquerors and enslavers. That answers the question. We're Christians because we were enslaved by Christians. continental Africans who are Muslims because they were enslaved by Muslims. Simple. In the Nile Valley, if you are honest and sincere about the study of this history, you will find the origins of the Abrahamic faith. You will find the origins of Judaism, Christianity, and religion carved on the walls of temples and tombs that are thousands of years older than those religions. So that information has been suppressed. If people knew the truth about God, about the concepts of God, the concepts of the Creator, if they understood how this knowledge has been used to mentally, psychologically, and spiritually enslave a people, then they would begin to revisit their relationship with divinity. And so what I am encouraging people to do is to read and study, because nobody has the right to impose their religious beliefs on anyone. Everyone has the right to believe what they want to believe, but your belief should be, and belief is the wrong word to use, because a belief is the acceptance of something without proof. What I'm suggesting is that people know that this creative force, which some people call God, some people call Allah, some people call Jehovah, this creative force is real. And it has always been present, and it has always been accessible to men and women when they eat properly, when they think properly, when they act properly, and engage in rituals that strengthen their relationship with the unseen presence of divinity. And you find the earliest examples of that and the oldest examples of that in the Nile Valley. Others came in, took a piece of these spiritual traditions, went home and created religions which were then used to either say that they were the chosen people, because all free people choose their relationship with the Creator, or these newly created religions were used to determine who was an infidel or who didn't have a soul. And as a result of the Pope saying that you didn't have a soul, it now made it possible for Roman Catholics to violate at least 5 of the 10 commandments.
Can you tell us about Asar, Aset, and Haru? Who are they?
That's a story that I can spend an hour talking about, but I'll condense it to three minutes. Asar, Aset, and Haru is the foundational mythology of ancient Kemet. Every culture, every civilization is rooted in myths. Myths, every religion is rooted in a mythology, whether they acknowledge it or not. So myths have a way of transferring knowledge and information beyond time and space and beyond the limitations of personality. So the foundational myth of ancient Kemet, the oldest documented civilization known to mankind, is the story of Asar, who came from the south, Kush particularly. And actually, within the Ethiopian traditions, they have an Asarian story that preceded the Kemetic story by at least 4,000 to 5,000 years. But Asar is the person who was responsible for uniting the two lands of Kemet, establishing the first nation state. He is said to have introduced agriculture, the means by which he could feed the people of his nation, and spiritual traditions. Asar then married a beautiful African woman by the name of Aset, who was his co-regent. Asar, after he established the nation of Kemet, then decided that he was going on a mission within the continent of Africa to bring his knowledge, to share his knowledge with others, to lift them out of darkness. And he left his queen, Aset, to run their nation in his absence. This act angered Asar's brother Set, who felt that he should have been left in charge. Set ultimately murdered Asar, and in one of the stories, dismembered his body and scattered it into, shattered his body into 14 different pieces and scattered them throughout the land. Aset went searching for the missing parts of Asar's body. Now let me give you some context. This story is at least 6,000 years old. There's a version of this story in Ethiopia that is 10,000 years old. So Aset went searching for the missing parts of Asar's body. She found 13 of the 14 parts of Asar's body. As she found each body part, she washed it, she anointed it with oils, and she literally laid his body parts on the table, and Aset literally remembered Asar. and then wrapped his body in bandages, thus creating the first mummy in recorded history. It took her 70 days to complete the process of finding Asar's body and preparing his body for burial. So 70 days became the time frame for the process of mummification in Egypt for the next 3,000 years. That's how important this myth is. Before Set buried her husband, she grieved as any wife would grieve because she was about to bury the man that she loved. She also grieved because, according to the story, Set was a virgin. She and her husband had never consummated their marriage vows. So before Set buried her husband, the spirit of her deceased husband, Asar, came and impregnated her. And then 9 months later, the virgin Set gave birth to her son Heru, who was born of a virgin and born on the same day as his father Asar. That day corresponds to December the 25th. Heru was born with one specific mission, and that was to restore his father's kingdom. So if you travel to Kemet, we do study tours every year to the Nile Valley, and we show you this story carved in temples and in stone. We can take you to the temple of Abydos, the oldest temple in Kemet, and show you the story of the spirit of Asar impregnating his virgin wife, Set. We can take you to the temple of Philae that is dedicated to Set, where you see images of Set giving birth to her child and then hiding this infant child among the bulrushes in the Delta region of the Nile Valley. I can take you to the temple of Edfu, the temple dedicated to Heru, where you can see the scenes of Heru battling his uncle Set, defeating his uncle Set, and then reclaiming his father's throne. So Heru then becomes the legitimate heir to the throne of Kemet, and at the moment Heru reclaimed his father's throne, then his father Asar was resurrected from the dead, and then took his place on the throne of judgment. So here you have approximately 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus, a story of an immaculate conception, a virgin birth, the Son of God being born to avenge the murder of his father, to restore his father's kingdom on earth, and being the pathway through which the souls who follow them will be able to find their place in heaven as they stand before Asar on the day of judgment. All of these concepts are African concepts that are documented thousands of years before the advent of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So when you know African history, you can deconstruct African mythology that is embedded in the Torah, that is embedded in the Bible, that is embedded in the Quran. And you can look at these great books with greater wisdom, greater insight, and get the true knowledge that is there waiting to be gleaned when studied and examined by a liberated mind.
So if we take what you've been teaching for so long and the culturally centered aspects of it, and we begin to, all of us follow the lead that you and the people who came before you have the path that you wanted us to be on, where does that leave us in 10, 20 years from now? What does the future look like for us if we follow that lead?
In 2020, America is manifesting what Malcolm X said in November of 1963 with the assassination, when he was asked to respond to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He said, "Chicken's coming home to roost." You can't go out into the world and commit evil without evil and violence visiting you. You can't destabilize communities and nations without your community and your nation being destabilized. So what we have witnessed in America since May, what we have witnessed is the longest sustained protest in American history, with more protesters in American history. And we've also seen similar protests with tens of millions of people all around the world. Why? Because of a visceral response to a white police officer choking the life out of George Floyd. Now, folk have heard black people complaining about violence, complaining about abuse, but through the advent of technology, when it's used properly, And that video image was transmitted all around the world. And people felt the pain that African Americans have been feeling for over 400 years. And they understood that there is a need now for people to stand up and say, I've got to speak out against this abuse. And so we're witnessing that. Now, what does that mean on a larger scale? Why is it happening now? I submit to you that one of the reasons why it's happening now, and one of the reasons why a large percentage of those protesters are non-black. You got brown people, you've got red people, you got yellow people, you got white people out there protesting too. Why is that? I submit to you that one of the reasons why it's happening is because of the advent of technology. You've got two generations now, people all around the world listening to black music, right? Watching black entertainers and wanting to be like them, watching Black Panther and feeling proud about Africa and African people. You know, watching black basketball players and tennis players and golfers and football players and baseball players, and now seeing black people in a different light, being able to relate to us on a different level. So then this George Floyd incident then kicks off something that has been dormant in people who've been internalizing black spiritual energy for decades. And it moves them to respond like human beings are supposed to respond.
Wow. Anthony Browder, thank you so much for joining us on the movement.
My pleasure. Thank you for initiating the movement.
To world-renowned scholar and researcher Anthony Browder, thank you for joining us on The Movement. And to you, our viewers, remember to follow us on Facebook at The Movement with Kemet and Kofi. And remember to join us next time on The Movement.